last week we were talking about the home front in America. In other words, what was going on in America during World War II? And we saw that there was a mixed experience. We saw that while people were uniting, Rosie the Riveter was taking place, was working away, and we see that even African Americans had been offered job opportunities. Yet at the same time, we saw that there was still racism going on and that people talked about the double V, the victory over fascism overseas and the victory for democracy at home, the victory against racism at home. This was the double V campaign. So now we're going to take a look at two different incidents. And this is actually a short lesson this week because there's some work for you to do to experience this. There are two things. The first one is the Japanese internment. This is when, following the attack on Pearl Harbor several months later, FDR issued Government Order 1066, which was that they were going to round up every person of Japanese ancestry living on the West Coast and relocate them to camps in the middle of the country. Now, they weren't being put to death, but they were behind barbed wire and they could not leave, and they were held there for the duration of the war. So that's one. The other event took place in Europe, and it's known as the Holocaust. This is the systematic destruction of Jews, homosexuals, gypsies, and anyone else that the Nazis considered undesirable. We're going to look at these two events because, after all, we have said that World War II is a battle between good and evil. And yet here are two events that look remarkably similar, at least on the face of it. Hopefully at this point in your high school career, you've been exposed to the Holocaust. Hopefully you have read an excerpt from Elie Wiesel's Night in your English class. Here's a picture of prisoners, and they've been essentially dehumanized. Their hair has been shaved off. They are forced to wear yellow stars. They're forced to wear the famous striped pajamas, and they were either worked to death or starved to death, or they were executed in gas chambers and had their bodies burned in crematorium, which are giant ovens used to dispose of the crime. Places like Auschwitz had permanent snow falling, except it wasn't snow, it was ash from human bodies. One of the most horrific times in human history, where the Germans, the Nazis, used industrialized methods to slaughter millions of people. Let's see how it all started. Okay, at the top is a quote from Reichsfuhrer SS Heinrich Himmler before senior SS officers in Poznan on October 4th and 6th at the Wannsee Conference. And we want to get to this point of how did something like the Holocaust happen? Well, it all starts with the belief. Remember, we had talked about fascism, the belief that put the state, and the state as a symbol of a people and a group against other groups and peoples, at the head of everything. So the quotation says, "Nature is cruel. Therefore, we are also entitled to be cruel. When I send the flower of German youth into the steel hail of the next war without feeling the slightest regret over the precious German blood that is being spilled, should I not also have the right to eliminate millions of an inferior race that multiplies like vermin?" Vermin are things like mice and rats and cockroaches. And here they are referring to these people as inferior. That is essentially a fascist view. We are better than you. We have us in the middle and them on the outside. Well, the timeline that I set up here that shows how these things started, and again, it started slowly in 1933 with what we call the Nuremberg Laws. And the Nuremberg Laws separated Jews from German society. It made them wear the yellow star. It made it illegal for them to fly the Nazi flag, the swastika. Instead, you would fly the Star of David, or the flag of Israel, not of Israel. You would fly the flag with the Star of David on it. Jews were not allowed to marry Germans. They were not allowed to date Germans. They were not allowed to have Germans working under them. They were not allowed to be school teachers. All of these things started slowly, but it effectively separated them. It made them different. The students were required to go to Jewish schools only. And you would see signs that say "Nicht für Juden," which means not for Jews, on businesses and parks and benches and all kinds of things. Well, eventually this built up. And in 1938, in response to violence against a German officer, German authorities start a night of violence. And they stirred the mobs up. And the mobs went on a rampage, smashing Jewish synagogues, businesses, and homes. They call it the Night of Broken Glass because of all the broken windows that were there. And synagogues were torched. And many Jewish people in Germany realized this is something different. This isn't what we had had before. Many people, like Albert Einstein, did whatever they could to get out. Some people, like Otto Frank, left and took his family to the Netherlands, got out of Germany. They thought, oh, we can read what's coming here. Unfortunately, in 1939, when World War II starts with the invasion of Poland, Hitler was close behind. And now all of these people are trapped once again. In 1940, Hitler and the Nazis begin to move them into ghettos. They would take a section of a city and they would wall it off and they would force Jews to go and live there. They were all forced to cram into this one area. Finally, by 1941, the ghettos were all dissolved as they began moving Jews to concentration camps. These camps set up in the outskirts of towns, not in major cities, but out in the country, in places like Poland and Croatia and other countries, not so much Germany itself. These were work camps, but their primary function was to execute people, was to kill as many people as they could. They were worked to death, they were starved, they were executed in gas chambers, their bodies burned in crematoriums. This was something called the final solution. If you go to the reading section, you have two things. You have two voices. It says Night, Diary of a Girl. And there are two people. One is Anne Frank. Anne Frank, in the upper left-hand corner, her family went into hiding in a place called the Annex. It was a hidden room. And you can see there behind that bookcase, the bookcase moved over and there was a passage in. And she and her family lived in hiding for 2 years, not daring to move while people were in the building downstairs and having food smuggled to them by friends. They were hoping that they could escape. And on the other end, you have Elie Wiesel. Elie Wiesel, whose picture is circled, there on the right. He went through as I think a 13-year-old boy, and he managed to survive at Buchenwald. And he wrote the famous book Night. And what I'd like you to do now is to really get the experience. Read both of these. Click on the reading link where it says Night, Diary of a Young Girl, and read both of these just to get this experience. One, Anne Frank hiding for her life. She was eventually discovered and turned in. They think someone betrayed them to the Germans. They never found out who. But she was taken and she died in Auschwitz about a month before the camp was liberated. And Elie Wiesel, even though he went to Buchenwald, he survived, and he just recently, within the past 10 years, had passed away. So if you want to read that, please. To really get the experience of this, we have two excellent websites. One is at the Smithsonian, and that's about the internment. That's called The More Perfect Union. That one has 6 sections to it. I want you to explore 3 of them. Click on the website, click on the artifacts, click on the pictures, look at the videos, listen to what they are saying. And the second one, you want to go to the U.S. Holocaust Museum and just click on the link. It'll take you there. And you have 6 different areas you can look at. Again, I want you to pick 3. One's on propaganda, the other is on neighbors, and to learn more about the Holocaust and how this happened. Explore 3 sections of each website, then come to a conclusion, supportive evidence to this prompt, that the Japanese internment was more similar, different than the Holocaust. So you decide, was it more similar or was it more different than the Holocaust?